Welcome to I Remember Menomonee Falls. On behalf of the Historical Society, we'd like to welcome everybody to our first program here of I Remember Menomonee Falls. I'm Jim Jeskowitz, and I'm going to be kind of the narrator of our first program. The beginning program that we've got is going to be a little bit of history on the police department of Menomonee Falls. And we're very fortunate to have some guests here who were all members of the police department in Menomonee Falls way back when. And we're going to have the individuals introduce themselves and tell a little bit about how long they were with the police department, when they started, when they finished, and their rank. I think we'll start first with Jack.
Okay, Jim. Thank you. I'm Jack Petroff. I'm the youngster in this group. I started in 1969 as an 18-year-old kid as a clerk dispatcher and became a patrolman in 1974. And I retired in 2003 as the fourth police chief in Menomonee Falls.
Good. Thank you. Dick?
I'm Richard Schwemlander. I came on in May of 1961, retired in July of 1998. I was a patrol officer, and my final job was community services officer and dare instructor for the village.
Dan?
Okay, Dan Banton, started in April 1960, retired in January of 88, and retired as lieutenant in patrol division.
Okay, and George?
Sergeant Lindmeyer, started in April of 60. And I retired, the same as yours was
88.
1988 as sergeant, and that's it.
That's it. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, super. And we do have another guest who'll be coming on a little bit later after we get our program going. A little bit of the history of Menomonee Falls. It was interesting doing the research, and there isn't really too much research. Jack and I did quite a bit of it, trying to find out what was going on before Otto Schneider, our first police chief, took over in 1937. But a couple of the interesting things that I found, there was one individual, Harry Brinkman, who was a Milwaukee police officer, motorcycle officer, I believe, who was, at least as far as the newspaper was concerned, was one of the first constable, or I think they called him a marshal actually at that time. They had a bunch of different names for the officers. And he was one of the first ones that we can remember and that they talked a little bit about. And I thought one of the interesting things was in those early days, the problems that they had were primarily two from what I did in the research. Number one, of course, was making sure all the drunks got home. And number two was jaywalking. And it was kind of interesting in 1924, 25, somewhere in there, Henry asked if somebody could donate a police car or a new squad to the police department because he was getting a sore back carrying all the drunks up to the village hall at that time and putting them in jail. And sure enough, about a month or 2 months later, anonymously, somebody bought him a new car, and he had a new car at that point in time. But one of the big concerns, as I said, also was jaywalking. That seemed to be a big concern also with a lot of people. One thing to remember, I think, also, prior to 1958, Menomonee Falls was actually only 1 square mile. You know, now we're 33 square miles. But prior to 1958, when we merged with the town of Menomonee, it was only 1 square mile. So one officer could move around a little bit.
And you forget that Appleton Avenue was U.S. Highway 41 going through the village of Menomonee Falls.
That's exactly right. And we were talking before with Dan, and I can remember Otto on Friday nights standing at the corner holding the thumb down and getting all the traffic, let it all go through Menomonee Falls without having to stop at the lights because of Highway 41. But anyway, the constables were here, and I think their salary, at least from what I can see in the early 20s, was anywhere between $8 and $15 a month is what they were making at that time as a constable. And I'll turn it over to Jack And he'll continue a little bit with our first police chief, who was Otto Schneider.
I wonder if that $8 to $15 was that negotiated by the police union? I wonder.
Yeah, there was a union, all right. Yeah.
Yeah, Otto, of course, the police department really, the kind of, Otto is kind of the namesake of the police department. He's the one everyone remembers as the first chief and first officer. And he did such a variety of things. You know, in 1937, he was the first police chief. But prior to that, he was the constable for the village of Menomonee Falls, and from 1927 to 1937. And he actually made big bucks in 1937. He was making $135 a month. So you guys probably were making a lot less than that, and you didn't realize that Otto was making that much more money. But he had a variety. He well deserved his money, because unlike when I served in that position, he had a variety of duties that certainly his successors didn't have to do. He had to wash down the intersection of Appleton, or Main Street and Highway 41, which is Appleton and Main Street now. Right. Had to wash that down every spring and get all the salt off the road and clean that up for the summer months. He had to every day check the water pump stations and the sewage stations. He plowed the snow and ran the front end loader. He built and maintained the ice skating rinks. He was the crossing guard. And he did driver's licenses. He issued driver's licenses. And I remember my mother, who's 88 years old now, telling me the story that when she went up for her driver's license up to the village hall, that she went up to Otto and says, "I'm here for my driver's license." And he, in his German, well-known accent, says, "Ah, Jeannie, if you wouldn't know how to drive, you wouldn't be here." And he gave her his driver's license. So he was quite a character, and things were pretty informal in those days. And he served until 1965, and I think there's a commemoration of Otto on the Firehouse Station 1, which was the first police station that was put up about 5 or 6 years ago. And I think it would be good if people in the community went up and take a look at that, because it shows his service as a police officer, and like I mentioned, a lot of other things as far as plowing snow and so forth. As also the first assistant fire chief for the fire department in the falls. So Otto, any commemorations that Otto gets is well deserved. He's a hard-working guy that did it all in those days.
Yeah, dog catcher. He was in as far as the dog catcher. Yeah. Going back to your driver's license, I remember when I got mine. I was 16. I turned 16 in July, and I didn't get around to getting my driver's license. And we were going hunting one morning. He and my dad were very good friends, and we were going hunting to Horicon Marsh. And we got up there about 4:30, 5 o'clock. We met at the police station to drive out to Horicon, and I asked him if we could do take my driver's test, and he said, "Sure." And he looked at me when we came, and he said, "Haven't I seen you driving around town?" I said, "Yeah, Otto, I'm practicing. I've been practicing." Well, this was October, and I turned 16 in July. Well, we drove around the block, and of course there wasn't a soul out. And he asked me, he said, I made a couple right turns, a couple left turns. He said, "Can you parallel park?" I said, "Yeah, I can parallel park." "Okay, drive it in." So we drove it in. He gave me the license, and we got in the truck and went hunting the Horicon Marsh, and that was it. So, but yeah, we've got a few other stories, and that's a little bit of where we're gonna start, where we're gonna take off from on some of the early stories with Otto, and then even continue up what we'll see as far as we can go, as far as some of the things that happened years ago, and things that are occurring a little bit today. Anybody else have anything with
Well, when
Otto?
I came on in '61, Otto was the chief, and started at $400 a month, which at that time for me was big money. The village was just starting to blossom out. We were had the parade of homes, so it was starting to get a little bit bigger. And 3 of us came on. Was Paul Regals, Terry Coulard, and myself. And we didn't have the training we had at that time, as opposed to what it is now, is on the job. You learned from one of the other officers. In fact, George was basically my training officer. And you worked day shift for, I think it was a month or 2, and then you went to early shift, which was 3 to 11, then you went to late shift, which was 11 to 7, and found out very abruptly that after 3 a.m., unbeknownst to the citizens at that time, at least most of them, there was only 1 squad for the whole village. I mean, we were covering 33 square miles. There was no such thing as a backup. I mean, Waukesha Sheriff was there, but they didn't really bother with Menomonee Falls. And we had a variety of duties. One of the duties that I had, I was a beat officer, and I walked basically from the old Lincoln School to St. Mary's Church, and on Appleton Avenue, which then became Highway 175 from the old Mart's Garage down to the Clark Station, which is a Subway shop now.
Right.
And one of the things I remember about Otto is that he had the neatest squad car. He had a 57 Chevrolet with a Corvette engine in, and he had this great big red light on a hinge below the dash. And when he wanted to stop someone, he swung that up, and there was no siren, no flashing lights. It was just a steady red glow. But they knew it was the police chief.
Right.
But one of the things we had to do, if we found out we was going to have an approaching thunderstorm, Otto, our chief, would have one of us, and usually was the beat officer. We had to take the blankets out of the jail, put them over the railing in the back of the firehouse, and let the rain pound on them to wash them. But they were horse blankets, so it took like 3 weeks before they dried out. And then Otto reluctantly gave up running the traffic signals at the four corners, and on a Friday night, that was one of the officers' jobs to regulate the flow of traffic. And one of us went down to F&M Bank, which is associated now, and directed bank traffic. And at that time in the 60s, and I'm sure you'll all agree with me, Menomonee Falls was a booming community. The four corners was wall-to-wall people, wall-to-wall cars. Everybody came because Sussex and Germantown and them, they didn't have any shopping centers or strip malls. So Friday night was a big thing.
Yeah. Friday night was always a big night, I remember, as a kid.
And we had, all the stores were full. There were no empty stores.
Yeah.
I could tell stories about Jack when he was a kid when I was an officer, but we won't go into that. I'm sure Dan and George can fill you in on some of the other things.
Sure. We're just going to take a quick little break now before we get to Dan, and we're going to substitute.
Let the young guy out.
Yeah, let
bring
the
us more
right
experience.
And we're going to let Earl Stanowski come in. So we'll take a break right now, and we'll be right back. Thank you and welcome back. We had a little break and we've got our number one substitute here. Earl, would you introduce yourself and tell when you came on and how long you were on and when you retired and how high you went?
Earl Stanowski. I was a sergeant, retired. I came on the job in March of 1967 and I retired in June of 1995. And I retired as a sergeant. I supervised during the course of my time, I supervised the Detective Bureau, the Traffic Bureau, and retired as a patrol sergeant.
Thank you, thank you. Well, continuing on a little bit with Otto, we've got Dan and George. They were both, and Dick actually, were all worked under Otto, and we've got some other interesting comments here that Dan will start out with. We'll let you go on Otto Schneider.
Well, one of the things with the training that we received when we came on, and it was one of the first big moves of the village to hire new personnel. So George and I came on together along with Terry Hansen and Ron Widman, and we were the first big group to be hired by the village to come on. So then it comes to training. Well, before training, first of all, what are we going to do for uniforms? So we got shirts, we wore police shirts and overalls until we could get our complete uniforms, and we had to piecemeal them together, and that took a while.
Did you have to buy your own? Excuse me.
We had to buy our own. Yes. And we got a gun, we got a Sam Brown belt from the village, we got the hat, we got the badges, and plastic jackets. That was hip-length jackets, we got those, and then slowly we got pants and so forth. Well, then it come to training, and basically it was you learned on the job or learned from another officer, and a lot of us thought, well, maybe we better get better training. So we went to FBI seminars, some went to the Milwaukee Police Academy, got into that. We went to the Waukesha County Sheriff's Department and different classes, and we went to different schools around that were put on by UW Extension, UW Parkside. Wherever we could get any training, we went and got. Not paid for by the village. It was all done on your own. So then we needed pistol training. Well, Otto's pistol training was to go down to the river on Pilgrim Road by the bridge and throw a can on one side, and as it floated down under the bridge, and you would stand on the other side, and then you would shoot at the can as it floated down the river. But that got a little dangerous, so we ended up hooking up with Waukesha Sheriff's Department and did some training, pistol training and shotgun training over there. And the squad cars we had at that time, we had a 1959 Chevy. Yeah, 1959 Chevy that we had. We had one squad car. And the other squad car was Otto's. And then we ended up getting a 1960 Ford. And boy, that was pure squad car.
White over green.
Oh,
Is that what it was?
White over green.
White over green.
and we got those two cars, so we had the squads, and we had our day squad, and then we had our early shift squad that come on, and then we had what we called like a power shift, and then it was 7 at night till 3 in the morning.
And they all drove the same car.
And all drove the same car until we got that second 60 Ford, but we had to bounce around. And you work 6 days and 1 day off.
Yeah.
That's what the work schedule was.
Oh.
So basically, that was it. The training you had to do by yourself. You had to go and get whatever training you could get by yourself and learn from the other officers that were on, and that was it. And some of the things that you think back of what took place with Otto training us how to operate the stop and go lights at the four corners, and how to regulate all that traffic on Appleton Avenue. And when we started to walk the beat, there was no explanation. You were on your own. Communications, there was none. There were no walkie-talkies.
No.
We had a little desk radio set that came when we started in the springtime that would be operating for day shift and the early shift, but didn't operate at night. And every officer had to have a couple nickels in a pocket so that you could call the phone operator to find out what was going on, because the red light at the four corners still operated, and when that was on, you knew that there was a call, something was going on, and that one of the phone operators had a call.
Had a call. I remember that, in fact, when I was in high school still, every time you'd see that red light, it is now the flower shop, the red light, and the operators were up above.
Yeah.
Telephone operators were upstairs, I believe. And you'd see that light blinking, and everybody knew, well, somebody's
that
looking
was-
for the police officer.
That was quite the thing. And then towards the middle of 1960, then the radio communications went the whole night. And then we did away with calling the phone company.
You didn't have to carry your
You
nickels in
didn't
your
have to
pocket
carry the
anymore.
nickels anymore.
Yeah.
But that was quite the thing. And you had to make sure that you got your nickel back when you told them it was a police call, and then they would refund your nickel.
What Dan's talking about with equipment, squad cars, I remember Otto going up Appleton Avenue one night, or one afternoon, and he passed Davis Ford, which is next to, the
Right.
building next to Dairy Queen, what we have now. And there was a
TK
white over
novelties.
green station wagon
Yeah.
for a family.
Yeah.
And he looked at that and he said, wow, that would make a great squad car. So he got village approval and went and bought it. Unfortunately, it was the smallest V8 they made. There was no police package, no beefed up suspension or nothing. And I'll be truthful, we really didn't like it because it just didn't go.
Yeah.
And it took you forever to catch anybody. But we put about 130,000 miles in that thing and it ran like a
Oh,
charm.
Just couldn't catch anybody.
No,
Yeah.
well, if you parked on Pilgrim and Silver Spring and a speeder went through the intersection that time, if you caught them by the time you got to Sussex, you're pretty lucky.
You're pretty lucky.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that people don't realize is that during that time period, for really the first 2 years on the department, and you guys remember, you'd have an accident and people were injured, you took them to the doctor's office in town. And the doctors treated them. They'd come in their office and you'd bring in these injured people and they would take care of them in their office
At any time.
at any time,
Yeah.
you know, day or night. Call them up, we're coming.
Or you'd get someone at an accident and they'd say, you know, can I help you, officer? Because you're on your own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you'd give them the first aid kit and say, follow me, and they'd go around and there was no, we had what, ambulance service came out of all places, the Schmidt Funeral Home.
Yeah,
And the closest hospital was Waukesha Memorial.
yeah.
And St. Joe's, I think, too, didn't they use?
Well, we always went to Waukesha
Waukesha,
Memorial.
okay.
Of course, they had cobblestone streets, so
Yep.
basically if the ride didn't do you in, I don't know what was going to be it.
That was
but,
a, they used to time it, Waukesha Sheriffs used to time it with their ambulance coming from Waukesha to Menomonee Falls. If they could beat 17 minutes,
That was,
that was tops. So
was
you knew
tops.
they were flying
yeah,
low.
yeah, they were. George, remembrances that you've got with Otto or your equipment.
Dan talking about
Just
the,
goes on forever, huh?
ambulance from Waukesha. The guy, he'd get over the name of that. What is the name of that little small town on used to those Highway 164?
To
Sussex?
Plainville there?
Oh,
or-
to
Plainville.
Yeah.
Plainville,
He'd
yeah.
call in, say, I'm about 30 feet above Plainville.
Yeah.
He's coming through at about 100 miles an hour.
Well, that was it with a lot of
The
those.
wagon that we had, though, that had a cot in the back of it.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
we did have, we ended
did
up
have a
putting
s- yeah,
a
stretcher.
gurney in the back, yeah.
So you could get them there a little quicker.
We could haul from here and go to Waukesha.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you just had one person
One
on.
person,
So all of a sudden, there was no police protection.
That's about it.
And the training and equipment was nothing like they have now. I
Oh,
mean,
God.
like Dan said, we did it on our own or else finally started going to schools. But basically you learned on the job, or in my case, George and Dan were my training officers and they were the veterans. They had a year on the job and you learned from them.
Yeah.
We had that resuscitator. Remember that big old clumpy thing?
Oh, yeah.
And you had to make sure the regulator was working right so that you had the right pressure for whatever size person that you were dealing
You
with.
don't want to blow them up.
Yeah.
The firehouse, well, that's station number 1 in Appleton.
Uptown, yes.
When we came on, that was the police department, the fire department, and the library.
Library, yep.
And I can remember Friday nights when we'd have quite a few people under arrest and the library be closed. We're talking like after 9 o'clock at night. We would have the guys or people that we arrested sitting on the steps, handcuffed to the railing, and it was just like a shuttle service, all right? We'd take one down and they would all move down another step, and we finally got rid of them. We had a municipal court.
That was upstairs in the
Walter
Walter
Meyer.
Myers was our
Myers, yep.
judge.
Yeah.
He was a good judge.
And one of the things that we learned in the police department office was a walk-in safe. How it got there, I have never found out what the reason of it was. And in this walk-in safe, Otto would make it a point that when you were down there, especially on nights, that when you picked up certain people in town, you had to make sure that they got their bottle, otherwise they would be tearing the walls down. And you'd go in there and you'd open up that box and there would be a couple bottles of booze of various sizes in there. So that when you'd lock up certain individuals and you'd hear them yelling, you had to go and get the bottle, take it over to them so that they got their drinks. Otherwise, they'd
Settle
tear
it.
the wall down.
Settle them down. How many cells were in there? 2?
One,
Just one
one
in
cell and then one was used for storage.
Okay. Now, with Judge with Meyer, when you got him on Friday night, would he come to the village hall?
No, we would have court, I think it was like on a Monday morning.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he was a very stern judge, but he was fair. But boy, you don't ever get caught lying in his court because
Oh, man.
the gavel would come down on you. But he was a very good judge. He was fair, but he was he was stern. I don't.
Yeah, it was.
He basically said, if you're not here, you wouldn't be here because you're guilty.
Right.
That would be it. And then in the safe we had, well, you have machines and all that now and that, but we had cigar boxes.
Yeah.
Otto had cigar boxes up on the shelf. One would be traffic fines, one would be parking tickets and all this and that. And I think the jaywalking thing sort of died off on that thing.
Other
but
things became more
that was
important.
his bookkeeping, and we basically wrote everything down on a regular
yeah.
cash receipt book, accounts book, whatever you want to call it. And we had to pull them boxes out and count the money and all that.
It worked fine.
Some of the things that really, they probably disappeared, but there were the logs, the police logs, that were kept for a long time. I know they were in the old archives in the building after we moved over into the new building.
Well, they might be
They were
around
down
there
there.
someplace.
And there were police logs there going to the start of the police department. Because, boy, you had to write everything in there.
Every
Yeah.
phone call.
Everything.
Yep.
Well, it was interesting. We've got a scrapbook here from Bob Schneider, Otto's son, and his mother, as I mentioned before and showed you, his mother started when Otto was the first police chief in 1937. Every week or every police report she's got in here, and names, and there was a couple families in here who seemed to visit Otto an awful lot. But it was really kind of interesting going through it. But that was the only report. I haven't. Jack might know a little bit more about the other logs, wherever
Yeah,
those
they
might
would,
be.
they would really be interesting because that could tell you the goings on, what went on in the village of Menomonee Falls, because I think it would really surprise a lot of people, the activity that really took place in this village.
With so few officers actually
Yeah.
covering
You
it.
got to know everybody,
Yeah.
either by face, by name, or by car.
Yeah, yeah.
By car, Otto had, that Chevy was his squad car.
Oh, God.
And of course, we had the incident when he used to take it ice fishing up at Winnebago, and one day he was up there fishing, and evidently the ice floe broke and it started to drift and the car started sinking. And he got it out just in time, and
Oh,
I guess
God.
secretly we were thinking, you know, what happens if the squad goes under, and him in it. So then he moved out to Lannon and took his squad out there one night, still a 57 Chevy, and they parked it there, and there was a tremendous storm that night, and a big tree limb fell across and smashed the squad. So that was the end of the squad, and that was the end of Otto taking
Yeah.
the squad
Taking the
home.
squad fishing.
That was all. He had to buy a car
Yeah.
to go fishing too, you know.
You know, Otto Schneider was a chief for many years, was involved in a lot of things, and after he retired, and he turned in his stuff to the village, and he turned in his gun. And I don't know who it was on the department, went and took his gun, and we took a look at it. And we had to pound the bullets out of the cylinder because they were corroded in there.
But really, you know, of all the stories we've been telling you tonight, we certainly didn't mean
Oh,
to degrade him in any way. He was a
He was
great
something.
chief.
Yep.
He was handed the job, and he did the best he can with what he had.
With absolutely no training.
Exactly.
He
Right.
just walked out off the street and he liked it, and he took off from there.
You know,
Yeah.
one of the biggest things we learning from Otto about police work was you had to learn how to read people. And you had to know in a hurry to understand who you're dealing with. And that led you how you can handle this person. And a lot of these young cops in this day and age, they don't learn that.
And Otto, I always found, you know, he really treated people well. You know,
Very
I mean,
well.
to get him mad, I don't know what it took, but he just treated people very, very nicely and very well.
He was well liked, and he
citizens-
was respected in
Yes.
the
The
village.
citizens are complaining. We
Oh.
got that all the time. And the citizens are complaining, and the citizens are always right.
Yeah.
And you had to listen to them.
But we never found out who those citizens
Yeah,
were.
we never did find out.
Well, I took a few of those home because his idea of Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, he says, you gotta know, he says, realize there's people out there that are drinking, shouldn't be driving. If you stop them, tell them that you have to get a call for another car to come out and have an officer drive his car home for him.
Oh, man, I don't know how many times we did that.
And if the guy give you a hard time, well, then
Then things changed.
Yeah.
it changes a little
Things
bit.
changes.
That's
But he
right.
said, give the guy a break. He said, it's, you know, he doesn't have
Yeah.
to be arrested for it, so.
Sure, as long as nobody was hurt, and fortunately, the traffic wasn't as heavy then as it is
No.
now.
And
We didn't-
family troubles, it's always two people involved, not one. It's always two people involved.
Yeah. Well, I remember a story also that Bob told me that before the parades, anytime they'd have a parade, which usually came down Appleton Avenue as we know it now, they had to he got up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning with a fire hose, and they would wash down the whole
Wash the
street.
hose.
Yeah,
Yeah,
hose the whole
yeah.
street down, so when the parade started at 9 o'clock or whenever it was, the street was clean. It was
Oh,
all
yeah.
taken care of.
One thing Otto told me, I don't know if he told you guys, but when I came on, he said, informed me we had a volunteer fire department, and he says, you know, they're going to help you whenever they can, if you know, in an accident or something. Get to know them, get to be their friends, and they'll do a lot for you. And all through my career, I made it a point to, when an accident, the fire department came, always thank them. And my son, who's now in the department for the last 20 years, I told him the same thing, you know, get to know the firemen because these guys are going to help you, and that's a helping hand in an accident.
Sure it is.
And it's worked out very well.
Sure. Earl, anything you can remember? I know now you weren't on with Otto.
Well, just listening to these guys, and I listened to them over the course of many years,
And you had to separate what was truth and what was
there's
fiction,
no question, there's no question. But it really gives a whole new meaning to Barney and Andy
Yep.
in a lot of respects, but that's the way it was back then. And Chief Kuhn brought the police department into what I would consider the current at the time.
No, he came from?
He came from the city of Milwaukee. He was the number 3 in command of the city of Milwaukee, if I recall correctly, police department. And I guess a few of the things that I remember most vividly about the community is that there were no divided 4-lane roadways in the village, with the exception of Highway 41 after a period of time, as we now know Highway 41, 45. And if memory serves me correctly, there were 2 traffic-controlled intersections in the community. Appleton Avenue, the Four Corners, as it's known, and Pilgrim and Appleton, as I recall, were the only 2 traffic signals in the community.
That's all there was.
Some 39 years later, at a guesstimate, 55, I started going through my mind the intersections that are controlled.
Yeah.
And
just go down Appleton Avenue.
yeah, and I felt that 55 was 55 intersections was a conservative guesstimate in terms of the number of controlled intersections today. And when we were on, and this goes back to you guys too, you know, there were just the 2.
What was the population, do you remember, about when you came on?
If memory serves me, it was about 17,000.
17?
Yeah.
Because we're about 34 now, I believe.
And that's kind of amazing too, because the population size doubled, and the police department probably doubled about the same over the last 40 years, from 67.
Now, we have, right now, I believe we've got 77 or 78 total officers.
And civilians.
And it hasn't.
And it
gone
hasn't
beyond that.
changed since,
No.
I can't remember, Jack can probably help us.
I think you'll find
it's
that
been 20 years.
basically when they retired, that's when they replaced them. They've never had a big influx of guys like when we came on with 3, 4 brand new guys.
Yeah.
All they're doing is replacing the retirees.
Right.
Or
Jim, we have
people leave for
59
different jobs.
officers. That's the same since 1979.
59 officers, and it's the same since 1979.
Well, how many were on when we retired? We retired in '88, and what, there was 54 or something like that?
Yeah.
459.
That
yeah.
seems about right.
Yeah.
And when
But there
we-
were a couple other things too that that we in 1967 as youngsters that we were learning from these guys. As a rookie, they'd say, "Meet me at Grenier's Curve."
Yeah.
Well, where was Grenier's Curve? You know?
Where's that?
Schwartz's Curve on 145.
Yep.
The 57 car might
Terry
say,
Hansen's
"Meet me
a
at
good one
Martz's
for
Hill."
that.
Sure.
We didn't know what that was. We didn't know where you grab a guy like Schwabi and say, "Hey, Schwabi, where's Schwartz's Curve?" Or you'd get a dispatch. We had radios, and you'd get a dispatch. There might be a 1050
Or the
at
beer
Schwartz's.
farm.
The beer.
That was a big thing, because for the years that we were on, we were dispatched by Waukesha.
Okay.
And Waukesha dispatched us those first couple of years that we had the radio, and that was 62 or 3 when we finally got our own radios, our own frequency on that. And then you'd get all these locations from Waukesha, which they weren't familiar with.
Sure.
And you'd sit there and you'd have to wonder what the heck it is. And then you try to get back to them, and there'd be another squad on and another squad on, and then you have to get the maps out in a hurry and say, where the hell is this? We, being on the department, still did not know a lot of the outside village streets that were growing and getting,
Sure.
Developed. And it was something.
Well,
And then just to go out with that, then when we got our own frequency, running on late shift, all of a sudden we started getting calls. There was squad 54, go such and such, you got an accident, such, and you go flying down there and there'd be nothing there. What the hell is this? And then you'd sit there and, you'd listen to another call come in, are you there yet? And here we were picking up Muskegon, Michigan, as clear as a bell,
Yeah.
late at night. You
Across-
remember when those would come through?
Across the lake?
And they had the same squad numbers and same street names, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. And here those calls were floating in, and it would happen late at night, certain
Sure.
air frequencies when it was just right. And so we were getting Muskegon, Michigan calls.
Well, it's funny because, of course, with the Waukesha Dispatch right now, we're not a part of it. But as you've read, they've just hired 4 more people to try and get that thing a little bit organized.
Yeah.
But they're still having a problem, exactly what you said. They will call in a certain spot, and, nobody's sure where it's at, or it's a wrong spot or wrong position or something of that nature.
Well, in that respect, when Charlie Kuhn became our chief, he brought us basically up into the 20th century.
Yeah.
We got better equipment and that, communications. And what he did, one of the things, when we moved in the new building, which is the President Police Department, he brought in retired police dispatchers from Milwaukee.
They were
become
police officers.
Yeah, they were
Yeah, they
retired
were
police
police
officers
officers.
who worked in the communications center, and they became our dispatchers. Well, then we had to train these guys because, you know, send a rescue squad down to Fussville. Well, these guys didn't have the slightest idea where Fussville was.
Yeah.
And so us, guess we were old timers at that time then, we would have to sit in with them and show them where everything was.
everything was.
But it worked out, in the end, it worked out really well.
And right now, it's working very well.
Yeah.
Right? Dispatch is
One of the things that they forget about Charlie Kuhn, he was the head of the training bureau in Milwaukee.
in Milwaukee.
And he came out here with all of that behind
Background.
him.
Yeah.
And that's when we started reports and new report forms.
And memo
new-
books. That was his
that
big
memo
thing.
book had to be with you all the time.
He wrote the handbook on memo books.
Oh,
That was our
something.
record.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about salaries? And you guys remember?
I started out at
Which-
$400 a month.
$400 a month. That was in 1961.
61.
Okay.
And to tell you the salaries. We started out at $360 a month. And we had to buy our own
You had to buy
uniform.
your own uniform. Yes.
Okay? And it was really funny because Otto come in and says, we got a raise from the village. I had to work for it, and we got the raise. We got a $20 a month raise. And we're looking at that, you know, the raise, and at that time I was single, and I'm looking at it, and they said, Otto, I can't take that raise. Why not? Why not? I had to work hard to get that. Well, put me in a different tax bracket.
Sure.
So I was taking home less money than I was taking before.
With a $20 raise.
He went back and he got us another raise. So at that time, that's when we got up to $400 a month.
We also got, all the village employees got at Christmas time, a Christmas bonus.
Yeah.
Oh,
Was it $10?
$10.
$10?
By
Less
check.
tax.
Oh,
By
We
check.
took tax. Yeah. So we got like, what, $9.30, something like that.
But the thing-
That was a big thing.
When we started, they withheld your first paycheck,
Oh, yeah.
okay? We're still waiting for that
Yeah,
paycheck.
You still haven't.
We still
Haven't
haven't
seen
gotten
mine
it
either.
yet.
Well, it's collecting interest right now. It's
Yeah.
probably in a 401k someplace.
But we had started, and we can get paid for 4 weeks, okay? Local businessmen in town got us into the restaurants and fed us
And took care
until
of
we
it.
got our paycheck.
Got your paycheck. Yeah.
You know, and that's, well, the old milk jug was
Sure.
one of the biggest ones, and
Sure.
he gave us all our meals, because we didn't have nothing.
Yeah.
And that's how different it was at that time.
The squads were altogether different. You know, the radios, no, there was no, well, air conditioning was roll the windows down.
Yeah.
Uniforms were long sleeve shirts, and in the summer you rolled up the long sleeves. Didn't look very nice, but we didn't have short sleeve shirts. Wore ties all during the
Had to wear
summer.
a tie all the time.
And it gradually changed and went like Charlie Kuhn actually brought it into. You know, Otto had to work with what he had, and then Kuhn brought in the big city influence, and we got better equipment, better
Air conditioning.
training, air conditioning, radios, walkie-talkies.
Air conditioning didn't come in until 1970.
72?
72.
72
Those satellites, those Plymouth satellites. we
Oh,
had.
yeah.
Yeah. And that was because at that time, I was buying squad cars for the police department and doing all that junk. And we finally got them convinced to put them in. And that was a big expense for the village because we were paying
Oh, yeah.
all of about $1,800 or $1,900 a squad car.
Yeah.
God, that was a blessing, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
Because, you know, if you work at late shift, 11 at night till 7 in the morning, and you're riding out, we call it the boonies, anything south of Good Hope Road. I mean, if you parked and watched a building or something like that, well, mosquitoes and bugs and all that, you had to keep moving, so you rolled the windows down. And I remember now talking about that. Otto, because of his limited monies that he had, we were limited to 80 miles
Yes.
on our squad per shift.
Per ship.
And you better not go over those 80 miles. So that meant in 8 hours, 80 miles. Well, if you had the squad south of Good Hope Road, you went from 124th
Right.
to 220th. That's a lot of miles.
Yeah.
So you got to do a lot of parking or
Oh, a lot of walking.
make some
to
minor
industrial
adjustments
park.
to the speedometer cable so you didn't check, because 80 miles, that was it. And you gassed up the car in the back behind the police department and checked it all over. But, it was just rotating. The seat never got cold.
Right.
As soon as you got up, another body came down and sat
Yeah.
down for his 8 hours.
What did they do in the case of repair, or you lost a squad, transmission went out, or something like
You
that?
used Otto's car.
Use
it,
Otto's
okay.
car.
And you better be careful.
And that was just the way he
Who
put
was
it,
the
too.
guy, the copper that was there when you and I were on?
Wetzel.
Wetzel.
How about the
What he
jail?
used to do?
Well,
41
I've heard some
raised the
stories
kids.
about the jail
No,
uptown.
no, he wanted to
One
be-
cell.
One cell,
Yeah.
did we have any interesting individuals in there that anybody remembers? Or was it mostly locals?
Locals. yeah.
Locals? Okay.
We didn't really keep them too long,
No.
If there was a guy, the wife or girlfriend, whoever it was, would come bail him out and all that. It was a rarity if we'd have it, overabundance.
They thought he put
And
all
like I
miles
said, we'd
on.
handcuff them to
Yeah.
the railing to the library.
Yeah.
And you did what you had to do. And
Did we transfer him to Waukesha?
Oh, yeah.
Did you have to?
Sure, we did that.
Anything that was a little more severe, we wound up taking them, as we do now.
We do all the talking and, about the funny stuff, but then you start talking with the house burglars and the business burglaries and the safe people that we nailed, and there were a lot of other different incidents that went on, stabbings and whatnot. They were hauled right over to Waukesha right away, and then, boy, that was it, because the officer had to stay there to see the DA in the morning, then you had your first court appearance, and we heard back here because we got an officer
Got an
tied up in
officer,
Waukesha,
sure.
and we don't have anybody working then the next day.
And especially at night when you only had one squad going.
Oh,
Lastly then, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen? Earl, you were talking about some in your
Well-
days on the force.
Just the period of time from 1960 when these guys were on to 1967, early 1967 when I came on the job. The training, as they mentioned, just simply became so much more sophisticated. I think I was one of the first groups after Chief Kuhn came. He instituted training at the Milwaukee Police Training Academy, and I was one of the first groups of people, of guys that went there. And that training consisted of 12 weeks and much more sophisticated than you guys ever experienced in your entire career.
Sure.
But that and the changes in the community, the salary we discussed, I started, it was $525 a month, which I thought was pretty decent. But I had a mortgage, I had 2 kids, of course a wife, and that $525, I know that George and myself and a couple other guys would get together at the end of the pay period and have a Kool-Aid party simply because there wasn't enough money to have a beer. Sure. But the changes from the time that I started, and you have to realize, I guess, that I personally was on the street for a portion of 4 decades, the 60s, 70s, 80s, and half of the 90s, as were these guys. Schwabe longer than that. And just the changes in the social atmosphere, the geography of the community, the dynamics of the community.
If you had to say 2 things, what were probably the 2 biggest things that are the biggest differences?
The growth of the community, clearly, and the equipment that the police officers are given today
given, okay.
to conduct their job.
Okay. And Dick, how about?
I would say training, and I think the way the officers perceived by the public now as it was when we first came on, we've gotten a lot bigger. We've gotten a bigger influx of different people and that, and I think that was a big change. That's something you had to acclimate yourself to, because you weren't dealing with 17,000 people, you're dealing with 34,000 people.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dan?
well, the same thing. The training, you just can't overlook. The training got greater as the village grew and the change of the people that have moved into the village. and the training that had to go along to meet these different needs that were
Different
here. And that was the biggest thing, because thinking back of everything that we had to do and go and learn, and now it's almost automatic that the fellows coming on now, they've got to have that training before they even hit the streets, even think about hitting the streets.
Sure.
And you got to adjust your training according to what you have for a community.
Sure.
That's the thing that I think of.
And George?
Well, we did the training for him.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, that defensive driving course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
And you
man.
were doing the training?
Dan and I both.
You did it? Okay.
We changed it when they started with WCTI, well, WCTC.
Yeah.
And they started with the training the police officers over there. And we worked on it. We had to train the officers in the use of the cars. We had a defensive driving course. We had a pursuit driving course. Then it turned into classroom work, and we trained all the recruits over there, actually for the whole state.
Firearms?
Firearms, everything was done over there. And it got pretty sophisticated. That's when we stopped sending to Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And we started to take over the training out there.
Well, good. Good.
Yeah.
Well, we certainly want to thank you guys. We could
Then
sit
we
here
had
probably
the
for
hot
another
shot.
hour, I think,
Remember who was
and
that?
just keep talking about
Gervais.
stories.
Who?
But we want to thank everybody, and we'd like to continue this type of a format or this type of a program. And if any of you out there have any ideas or suggestions as to something we can do, a little bit about the history of Menomonee Falls, I have an email address here that you can contact the cable access. It's IRMF, I remember Menomonee Falls, at fallscableaccess.com. So if anybody has any other ideas that you might have in talking a little bit more about the history of Menomonee Falls. And also, lastly, I'd just like to mention in thanking these individuals and also thanking the Historical Society. And if we do have any of you out there who are interested in helping out with the Historical Society, we can always use some physical help. And if any of you have got some specialties such as painting or carpentry work, we're always looking, especially at Old Falls Village, to try and upgrade that. And if any of you are interested at all, there is a phone number to call. It's the area code 262, of course, but it's 532-4775. And if any of you are interested in helping out, if you give that phone a call, somebody will be contacting you in a short period of time to see if we can put some of your expertise to work. But again, I would like to thank the individuals here, George and Dan and Dick and Earl, and talking a little bit about the history of the police, and Dick has still got a list there. We could go on with a few other things, but maybe we'll try it again sometime, and we can certainly come back and add a little more to it. And we want to thank everybody, and again, if you've got any other ideas, please let us know. Thank you very much, and let's have a good day.